Azores on the way to Haifa. Ultimately, I ended up in Israel, toured the country for a good part of the summer, but I had to run back because at the time I was a student and there was the whole thing with the Vietnam War. So as soon as I could, I returned to Israel in 1968 as an overseas student at Tel Aviv University. And on an outing with other friends, including my future wife, Sharon, I went snorkeling at Caesarea. I'm sure many of you have viewed Caesarea and or Caesarea. And by chance, with a mask, snorkel, and flippers, as I was swimming around, I noticed something glittering on the seabed. And I dove down and scooped it up. And lo and behold, I chanced upon a gold Roman treasure, which is something I recommend that all of you do at one point in your life. But it changed my life forever because it allowed me to do what I always dreamed about doing, was making a living from the sea. I came from California, the ocean and all. So with the few coins, I went up to Jerusalem with my wife, or my future wife, Sharon. This is 1968, one year after the Six-Day War and 1 year after Israel took return or control of all of Jerusalem. And through a lot of different escapades and excitement, which are outlined in the book, but we sold some of the gold coins, and I was able to start a business at the age of 1970. At the age of 23, I opened up the first diving school on the Mediterranean shore in Israel. There was one in Eilat at the time, and we became like the second. And that was on the beach in Herzliya. There's a mosque there, the Sinai Ali Mosque, and it was the very early ages or stages of scuba diving sport as a recreation, right? Not military. And you can see some of the divers going down towards the sea with their tanks and their spear guns, because then most people were diving to catch their lunch and not so much aware of the ecological implications. So we started to look around on the coastline of Israel to see where it might be interesting to take our students and our divers. And interestingly enough, we ended up in Gaza. And this is June 5th, 1972, exactly the 5th anniversary of the Six-Day War, which was kind of a strange time to show up in Gaza to go diving, but we were not totally tuned in. We were more interested about the exploration. And as we were diving there, we chanced upon what appears to be a shipwreck. And I took a picture. It looked like a gun or something on the deck. So I just made the assumption that it was maybe a military vessel, and I started to research it. And what we chanced upon was the Emir Farouk, which was the flagship of the Egyptian Navy in 1948, which was transporting Egyptian troops to Gaza City. And it was sunk by an Israeli commando team using very primitive tools, which was a speedboat loaded with explosive. They tied the steering, they lined it up and tied the steering wheel. And then at the last minute, the guy who was driving jumped off into the water, and it continued on and it sank the ship. So that was quite an adventure, and it was quite a discovery. But the real area of interest at that time was Eilat, because the Red Sea, as opposed to the Mediterranean, is quite clear, temperate, colorful. It's also something you could bank on for diving because it's diveable probably 360 plus days of the year, which is very, very important. And we started out in Eilat, looking around, and then the Sinai had just opened up. This is like the early 1970s. They were building a road from Eilat, which if you can see here, you see the arrows going down the coastline. Can you see the pointer that I'm using? Is that possible?
Yeah, I can see that well. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, okay, good. So we started in Eilat, and we started going south along this coastline, which was just made available by a road that Israel constructed for the first time, going down the Sinai coast. So we were like, to a degree, pioneers going through a strange land in the search of scuba diving possibilities. And along the way, we saw the classic views of the Sinai, something straight out of Lawrence of Arabia, Bedouins, camels in the wadis, in the riverbeds, beautiful granite mountains. It was stunning. But we also saw signs of destruction and war, because we can't forget that the Sinai has been a highway and a battleground from time immemorial, a highway of invading armies from Mesopotamia to Egypt and back, and everything in between. So there was a lot of remnants of war, which we passed along our way to go diving. For example, in the Tiran Straits, which is overlooking Tiran Island, you see in the distance, there were two cannon emplacements put there by the Egyptians, which blocked the passageway of Israeli shipping in 1956, and then again in 1967. And this was the casus belli, or one of them, of the Sinai campaign in 56 and the Six-Day War in 67, closure of international shipping lane. Right below where these cannons are is some of the best diving in the world, right? And also on the southern tip near Ras Muhammad, we found tanks, Egyptian tanks that had been shot or abandoned. And we were just driving along with our Jeeps looking for places to dive. And we go ashore there, and we dive, and then we come out and hang our wetsuits on the cannons. So that was like a pretty extreme situation, as it will be. So I'll just show you a brief video clip, which kind of was captured by an American team, just the opening, which shows the contrast between the battleground and the paradise.
Find an endless desert plain. And to the south, a great mountain range reaching deep into Saudi Arabia, across Sinai, and thence to Nubia on the African continent. Relics of destruction dot the landscape, dark reminders of the pathos and futility of war. Yet, in sharp contrast to this parched desert land, snuggling up against its shoreline is a body of water, just 20 million years old, young by geological standards, but so filled with wonderful and amazing sights, it is considered a mecca for sport divers. This is God's other world, the Red Sea.
Okay, so that you could just, this is the theme, that we went into this battleground and with the desire to do something that was making it more pleasurable and more accessible to an international community that was just starting. Scuba diving was just starting as a recreation and tourism of scuba diving. We went to a base in Nuweiba. Nuweiba is an oasis just about 70 kilometers, an hour's drive, a little less, from Eilat, going down the coast. This was the construction site of the people who built the road down from Eilat to Sharm. When they finished the road, they abandoned the site. A group of young Israelis, idealistic young Israelis, moved in, and they had a dream to turn it into a tourist resort and do also agriculture, which they did quite successfully. But this is the very beginning, and we got a little shack on the beach, and we started teaching diving right on the water's edge. And you probably know of dangers, or heard of dangers, about what might happen under the sea. So the biggest danger we encountered was perhaps getting run over by a camel as we were giving our diving courses, right? So we had to be careful right on the water's edge there. Also, the contrast between the scuba diving and the Bedouin. Anyway, we were exploring the whole time. This is now 1972, and we did the Pesach Seder in Nuweiba in 1972 with our school. And then we would go down along the coast. We, by any means possible, to just check it out and say, well, this is a good place. Some places are better, some are worse. We went by our van, by Jeeps, We used boats, fishing boats, anything available. This was the first American dive group who came to dive with us in 1972 next to Coral Island, which is just south of Eilat. We even used amphibious vehicles driving down the road and then say, hey, that place looks pretty interesting. Let's go and check it out and drive in and jump in the water and look around. And if it was good, we would stay and dive. Of course, as we went farther south, we found the area more isolated and also more beautiful. And we wandered upon a beautiful bay just outside of Sharm el-Sheikh in the southern tip of the Sinai. It's called Naama Bay. And at the time, it was virgin. It was just beautiful protected waters. And we decided to move our operation there. Remember this view, because at the end of the presentation, I'll show what it looks like, a little bit what it looks like today. And so we got a train car. This is an interesting thing. We made an agreement with one hotel in Sharm, and they said, okay, we're going to give you a base for operations. Next thing I know, a World War I vintage wooden train car was dumped on the beach, sandy floor, and we filled it with whatever basic equipment we could, and we started our diving business in Naama Bay, Sharm el-Sheikh. One of the big advantages, it was a very short commute from our home to work. Yeah, maybe 12 steps, and we were and Sharon and I, and even our first child, Diana, were living in this little trailer or caravan, as you would, and we were welcoming the guests coming in. We had also a vehicle, Army surplus Jeep that we painted orange. So if we ever got stuck in some wadi or some isolated place, maybe the spotter planes would see us better. And of course, there was always the Sinai towing service off to the right here, which which was always available if we had to get pulled out of the sand. We also had a few basic boats. This is the bay of Naama, okay? And we had a few basic boats, which are really like pregnant surfboards with a motor. And then we would take the divers out for the day diving, sitting on the floor, very basic. But we had one cardinal rule, which we never disobeyed, and that was we never crowded the boats. There were always plenty of room for the divers, at least maybe 15 centimeters for each diver to sit on the floor. And I'm being a little facetious here, but it was basically very, very primitive. And just where things were just happening, I had a little villa on the beach. I had a business on the beach in the best diving area in the world. And people were starting to come boom, as often happens in our region. 1973, Yom Kippur War. Any of you who read Hebrew can see it says Ophira. That was the name of the town that was just going up on the cliff here, where was going to be the town of Ophira. And here is Egyptian MiG, was shot down right over the town during the October 1973 war. So that set everything back a bit. Also, communications was affected because they strafed the communication area there. And anyway, at the end of the war, and just after we had a big stroke of luck, I managed to convince National Geographic magazine to come down to the Sinai and do a story about the diving, the diving possibilities, or the beauty of quality of diving in Sharm el-Sheikh. And this is some of the gear they brought, which I figured was worth more than my entire diving center. But anyway, they were very good sports. It was led by a famous marine biologist, she's an ichthyologist, actually, author, Jeannie Clark, the shark lady, who had just written several years before a best-selling book called Lady with a Spear. And she was a writer for National Geographic. And the team was myself on the right, Jeannie in the middle, David Dubélé, today the premier underwater photographer in the world, probably, as a young man on his first assignment. And then my dad came out from LA. He wouldn't miss the action either, so he's sitting in the picture as well. The main area of interest was actually two sites. One is Ras Muhammad, the head of Muhammad at the very southern tip of the Sinai, just extends the peninsula into the water. Legend has it that the Prophet Muhammad on his way from Mecca to Jerusalem with his white charger, Barak, did a kind of a pit stop here at Ras Muhammad on his way to Jerusalem. So they gave the name Ras Muhammad. It's become probably today one of the most famous diving sites in the world. Jeannie, in her article in National Geographic, actually wrote, if I had one place to choose to dive for the rest of my life, it would be Ras Muhammad. And the other area is, remember the Tiran Straits, where you saw the cannons overlooking the straits. The straits you could see here at the bottom was one of the passageways of shipping, and the other one is above it. That's Tiran Island, which at the time was of the 6-Day War. It was under Egyptian control. It actually belonged to Saudi Arabia. And today it's gone back to the Saudis that have big plans today to do a tourism development in that area. But just to give you an idea of the beauty that drew people to this area, is that this is one of the seascapes of the corals that it was so fascinating, full of fish, colorful fish, corals, formations, clear water, warm water, and that's what made the area so very special. Also, many sharks. And sharks, surprisingly, are attraction for scuba divers. They like to photograph and see sharks, and we had quite a few. Unfortunately, with sharks, they also have shark fishermen. So we, first of all, before I get into that, we observed underwater, you talked about amorous sharks. So we, in the book, I talk about it, we witnessed for the first time in nature the shark mating, actually the courtship and shark mating, and these marks. This is a female shark, and the marks here are all like, would you say, foreplay bites of the male, just kind of checking out the females before they actually do the mating. So this we witnessed. And like I said before, just now, that we also had a problem with shark fishing, which we were very much against, and it was illegal. And this is just a brief confrontation, which was filmed by BBC, actually, of myself confronting a shark fisherman in the Sinai, right near a diving site.
We have got visitors. Who is it? Trouble. It's an old rival of Howard's called Big Alex. He's a shark fisherman. We've got people in the water. I've been here since morning. You're driving my sharks away. Get your bait out of the water.
He's got his hooks in the water. The sharks are gonna start coming here. We got divers in the water over there, and they're gonna start coming over where the ship is. We're gonna have to cut his hooks and we'll get him out of here. Or else I'll just take my goddamn boat and put it right into the side of this boat.
So I was a tough guy once. I'm much more gentle today. Don't worry, okay? So we went in a campaign to stop the shark fishing. And here I photographing the Geographic team, Jeannie Clark, the shark lady on the left, David, the photographer, his wife, and at the time, the photographer. And we managed, with these pictures, horrendous pictures of sharks with hooks in their mouths and everything, managed to put an end to that and to preserve the quality of the nature of the sites. It was a little bit like the Wild West, or what we would call the Wild South then. Anyway, as a result of 3 months of work, we got the cover of National Geographic magazine in September 1975, which was a huge exposure for our operations in the Red Sea. It helped open up the international community to want to come and dive in the Red Sea. This was the first of 9 features that I was fortunate to work with or lead the expeditions of National Geographic all over the Red Sea, into the Indian Ocean, and also down to the Seychelles. So this was 25 years of work with National Geographic. One image, which kind of got a lot of mileage, if you will, was this shot that was taken by David and presented in an international competition for a time capsule that was put into the Voyager galactic strobe. There was a Voyager, maybe some of you heard of it, in the mid-70s. They sent a rocket not into outer space, but into the galaxy. And it's still going after 50 some odd years. It's still sending back signals. So they had this competition, and David submitted this picture to represent recreation, nature, whatever. The author Carl Sagan, you know, the astronomer who wrote the book The Murmur of the Earth, he was a scuba diver, and he liked the picture. So he chose Dafka, as they say, the picture of me diving at Ras Muhammad to be in the book as a representative. So some part of me is out there in the galaxy, and I like to feel maybe a little immortality because of my presence in outer space. So getting as far away from outer space as possible, my next assignment was as close to Mother Earth as possible, and maybe to our own roots. This is at the base of Mount Sinai. This is the St. Catherine's Monastery. It was built something like in the 6th century. A magnificent place to visit. And they had a Bedouin well that used to supply water to the residents of the monastery and the Bedouin tribes in the area. And they had a problem with it. It got broken, and they needed a diver to go down and help extract it. And yours truly idiotically agreed to do the job. And the next thing, I found myself far away from the Red Sea in the base of Mount Sinai, diving into this well. And as I went down, I had the best technology available. I had a special Bedouin elevator that took me down into the hole. And as I got to the bottom, I looked up, and I saw like 6 Bedouins looking down saying, "What is this guy doing in our well?" I mean, I'm sure it was the first time in 2,000 years a scuba diver went scuba diving in Mount Sinai. Anyway, it was a successful mission, although I almost lost my life in the middle of it. And we managed to extract the pump. You see me here with my fine technical team. And luckily, I got out of there alive and didn't end up in the skull room of the monastery, which we saw later in the day. That's all the ex-monks who served there, and they have a kind of a macabre resting place for them. Anyway, I was happy to get back to Sharm el-Sheikh and the sea, and we started doing different film projects. And this is an Italian pioneer in cinematography, underwater cinematography, named Bruno Velati. He made one of the very first feature movies ever under the water, and he came down to Sharm to make a movie about friendly monsters of the sea, the things that we think, sharks and polar bears and manta rays and whatever, that it might be considered dangerous are not really so dangerous. So he had me actually put a piece of bait in my mouth so a moray eel could come and eat it. Anyway, that's another funny story that's in the book. But he used me in this film. And here you go. Okay, so by the way, she's 85 years old today. That's just a comment. We're back in Sharm, and all of a sudden, I mean, with some of the income that we had from these film projects at National Geographic, and I also brought in a few partners, we managed to move out of the little train car, which you might see here at the end of the yellow arrow, and we built a very modern facility on the beach. That's the one hotel of the time in Sharm called the Marina Sharm Hotel. And that's where we had our operations. So we started improving. We started doing advertising. We had a diving center also by then in Eilat, and business was looking very good. And we continued to look for improving things. At the time, Shipwrecks became very formidable, attractive, because they just came out with a movie called The Deep in the Virgin Islands. They found a shipwreck, and it was a movie, a very, very popular movie, and it brought a lot of tourists. And we said, we got to find the shipwreck also so we could attract some tourists. Only we had shipwrecks that were sitting on the reef. As you can see here, this new ship came aground, and this is an older ship, right, from 100 years before that, sitting on top of the reef. We made money, by the way, from these wrecks, because we were helping with the salvage operations, taking the crews off and giving supplies and all. It was very profitable, but that's not what we wanted. We wanted our own wreck. And we even constructed a story, a very romantic story, which was purely in our imagination, about Lawrence of Arabia and the World War I and the bringing gold to the Bedouin fighters. It was a whole fabrication, but we made it up. Only thing is that we were missing a wreck to show people. And then we were talking to the Bedouins, and they said they think out in the Suez, around the corner of Ras Muhammad, there is a wreck. And maybe you could find in that place, you'll find a wreck. So we went out there, and lo and behold, they said, you go around the corner of Ras Muhammad and you head out into a reef, out in the sea, and there you smoke 3 cigarettes on the way. That's the GPS of the time, 3 cigarettes, and you'll find a reef out in the middle of the water. And here it was. And at the base of that reef, we discovered the Dunraven. Now, the Dunraven is a British ship, sank in 1876. It's a whole story. At the end, I think maybe we'll post a link to the BBC movie about it. It's very interesting. And a shipwreck is basically a time capsule, because inside you have things of the day, and we found many things but unfortunately not any gold. But it's also an ecosystem, a magnet for fish life, and very attractive. And this is an image of our team working with the BBC on. It was called The Mystery of the Red Sea Wreck, and it was in a series you might remember, The World About Us, on the BBC. So these are some of the artifacts we found, which help us find out more about the wreck. You can even see we found everything that was not valuable, including the kitchen sink here, right? But we didn't find any gold. And our area also had many interesting people who showed up. This was one of the more interesting ones. You might have heard him conduct a symphony. Leonard Bernstein was a frequent visitor to our diving center, and he loved it. And every time he would give a concert in Tel Aviv, he would come down, or Jerusalem, he would come down and spend a few days with us diving. And there's a very funny anecdote about him that I write about also in the book. Anyway, things are just happening. The peace process is just taking off. And Jeannie, my mentor and the writer, had a chance meeting with Anwar Sadat in Jerusalem and Cairo, and she convinced him that to send down a delegation of Egyptian scientists and officials to check out. This is just the transition during the peace process. And they came to the diving center before Israel left and met with me, and I talked to them about the potential of diving tourism. And then later I was invited to go to Cairo and to address the subject at the bilateral tourism talks. And we talked about the need to protect the nature, which would attract tourists. And this is a short piece by CBS News. I'll just do it real quickly about what was happening at the time.
Many places in the world, you can slap an air bottle on your back, go down 30 feet or so, and watch the sharks go by. In fact, just about the only place you can do it with some hope of living to tell the story is in the Red Sea off Ras Mohammed, the southernmost tip of the Sinai. And even here, divers are afraid they might not be able to do it much longer. The sharks living off the coral reefs here are among the most accessible in the world to scientists, to photographers, to intrepid divers. Up until now, at least, they've been very friendly. But this whole area, all of the Sinai, is in the midst of a political transition right now, and believe it or not, the sharks are caught up in it. For the last 12 years, the sharks have been swimming in Israeli waters. They're about to become Egyptian. Anwar Sadat is gradually regaining control of the entire desert and its territorial waters. Israel is giving up what it conquered by force and what it learned to love and protect. The Israeli occupation may have been controversial politically, but ecologically it was a masterpiece. The Israelis set up nature reserves. They passed and enforced tough legislation protecting wildlife on the sands and in the sea. Dr. Clark went to Cairo recently to take her case to the president. Sadat responded by sending a small team of Egyptian officials, scientists, and scholars to Ras Mohammed, the first such trip made overland in almost 25 years. They were subjected to 3 days of well-intentioned Israeli propaganda on how they, the Egyptians, should take care of their land and their world leader. Anwar Sadat receives a lot of petitions. Here's a lot of pleas. This is one he probably hasn't heard before. Save the sharks. Bob Simon, CBS News, in the Red Sea.
Okay, we're running tight. I know there's a structure. I might be a few minutes over. I hope it's okay with you, Ivar.
Absolutely. Carry on, Howard.
you-
It's fine. Fine.
If you go like this, I don't get offended, okay? So shortly after that, Anwar Sadat himself with Menachem Begin came to Sharm, and they had a summit meeting next door to my diving center. And just before they were meant to meet, they realized there was no table or chairs for them to sit on. So they said, Howard, get over to your diving center and bring some table and chairs so they can sit, the two leaders, the great leaders. And, you know, you often see these pictures on television of Arab leaders and other leaders sitting in these posh big chairs, you know, very comfortably. And I was just praying that one of these straw chairs wouldn't collapse on Begin or Sadat and create an international incident right there in Sharm el-Sheikh. Anyway, and so this was a new era. And for the first time, Israeli flag, Egyptian flag, we were coming in and going out of the Egyptian side. The Sinai at that time was split down the middle, and we got special permission to go into the Egyptian waters, which were previously at our own Israeli waters until this happened. And I was assigned the task of working with the bilateral teams of Israelis and Egyptian officers. These two guys in the blue uniforms are Egyptian officers, and this is an Israeli colonel in the Navy. And I was pointing out on the maps which were the nature reserves, which needed to be protected, where we were diving. It was an amazing bilateral cooperation at the time. One of the leaders of this whole effort was my dear friend and student, Ambassador Samuel Lewis, who was an avid scuba diver. I taught him how to dive when he was ambassador, and he was instrumental in the Camp David peace process. And there's a whole chapter about Sam Lewis in the book, but this is just one scene caught on camera of him just as he returned from handing over the articles after the Israeli parliament ratified the peace process, the Camp David Accords. He was at the ceremony in the Sinai where the Israeli delegation handed it to the Egyptians and the Egyptians handed the Israeli. And then he came to scuba dive. And this is kind of a cute segment of him scuba diving, coming to visit.
Straight from the latest peace talks.
Morning. Welcome home.
Thank you.
How are you?
Oh, fine. I did the dirty deed yesterday.
Yeah. What'd you do? You gave it away.
Gave it away. But listen, it's 2.5 hours late finishing. You heard that.
What
That's
was
why I
it?
got here at 2 o'clock in the morning.
It was on the radio.
I spent 2.5 hours trying to persuade them
Russ Muhammad.
to stick the line a little further west.
Did you?
I
Stick
did.
deep?
I failed.
You failed.
But I really worked at it. 2.5 hours, we had 200 people sitting out there waiting for the ceremony. The sun was getting lower in the west. And there I was arguing for your damn dive sites.
And it didn't work.
Well, maybe we'll get it next year.
Yeah, you think so? But did it go okay? I mean, we pretty, in the end, it worked out okay.
No, it worked out fine.
Yeah.
We had to talk to Sadat and the Bacon on the phone and straighten out a few last minute problems.
Really? You think I'll be able to
For
outplay
3 years anyway.
Okay, so that was it. It was a done deal. And the next thing we know, the International Peacekeeping Force, the MFO, landed in Sharm el-Sheikh, a direct flight from the United States with the 82nd Airborne, and they were going to supervise the peace treaty. Just kind of an image of the comparison between the 82nd Airborne marching down the highway from the airport to their base. And this is the local Sharm residents kind of out there to greet them. Anyway, National Geographic came and did a big story in April 1982 of the Sinai withdrawal. They featured our diving center, they featured our family, and talking about what we had been doing. This was our community in Ophira, just on the cliff overlooking the Red Sea with the majestic mountains, granite mountains behind it. We lowered the flag for the last time, Israeli flag in Ophira. We, as a family now with 3 little kids, packed our bags not knowing what the future would bring. And that's the army base of Israeli army at the time in Sharm el-Sheikh, Ras Mohammed at the very far distance. That was the view we would see every morning drinking coffee. Anyway, it was a sense of deja vu, The Israelites are leaving the Sinai once again. But I was a determined guy, and I decided that I wanted to stay and work in the area. I got a special permission, and I formed a new company after 1982, which I called Fantasy Cruises. And we started doing a floating hotel for scuba divers using old yachts that we converted into liveaboard diving boats. And we basically traversed that whole area of the Sinai. And as the boats got bigger and the fleet grew, we started going in that farther down the Red Sea because for the time, for example, there was the Gulf War, another war came. So we ended up going all the way down into Yemen. These are Houthis in Yemen.
We should have two sets because they know where we are from, or at least they have
Israelis and Yemenites. Anyway, we were harassed. We had helicopters coming down on us. We went aground off of Sudan, full of Israelis off of Sudan. We had to be rescued. The guests had to be rescued by helicopter. Israeli Air Force flying all the way to Sudan to airlift. You don't want to end your diving holiday in this situation. But we managed to get all the way down the Red Sea and into the Indian Ocean, diving along the way. And it was a cover story for National Geographic about diving the Red Sea. And this is in 1993. You can see the cover. We're almost at the end. And we got to the Seychelles because the Gulf War wouldn't allow us to work in the Red Sea. So we opened up a new area, a discovery called the Seychelles Islands, especially in a atoll called Aldabra.
Obtains port clearance from the harbour authorities of Victoria, and the expedition members carry out last-minute equipment checks. David Duboulet, National Geographic's underwater contract photographer, has travelled to many of the world's most obscure places, world's largest coral atoll, covering an area of some 200 square miles.
Anyway, ultimately we went back to Sharm. That was the Sharm we left, Naama Bay. Now look at it, what it's like today. Look at the picture as Sharm is today. And I ask myself often, maybe I was participant in creating an ecological monster. I'm not totally at ease in that. So anyway, what does a 76-year-old, 77-year-old diving dinosaur do when he can't do what he did his whole life? He sits down and he writes his memoirs. So that's what I have here.